This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening. I'm Oteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. Growing calls in Asia to de-escalate the Israel-Iran conflict. China warning of regional spillover, while South Korea prepares emergency financial support. Major upset in Tokyo. Voters are dealing Japan's ruling LDP a historic defeat in the assembly election, a warning sign for July's national polls. And South Korean President Lee Jae-myung announces his picks for 11 cabinet positions, including the country's first civilian defense minister in more than 6 decades. And both President Lee and Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba are skipping the NATO Summit in the Netherlands to address urgent domestic matters amid rising Middle East tensions. And nervousness in the oil market as an early rally in crude prices fades. Investors are awaiting a response from Iran to the U.S. bombing of its nuclear sites. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, trouble in the land of smiles. Thailand lost its crown as the most visited ASEAN country this year after arrivals from the largest market tumble. Israel and Iran trading fire for the 11th day as international calls for a de-escalation grow. Tehran today threatened the U.S. with retaliation in response to the weekend bombing of its nuclear facilities. Now, the armed forces vowed in a video message aimed at American leader Donald Trump that Iran will end the war that Washington started. Tehran also pledged to carry out what it describes as powerful operations with unpredictable consequences. It previously threatened to target American bases in the Middle East. Now, Mr. Trump earlier claimed that strikes by his country's stealth bombers, quote, totally obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. Well, satellite images show damage at Iran's Fordo, Isfahan and Natanz sites. Officials have cautioned that the extent of destruction remains unclear. Our countries, in the meantime, are urging for restraint.
中東地域の平和と安定は我が国にとっても極めて重要であり、国際社会とも連携し、我が国として必要なあらゆる外交的努力を引き続き行ってまいります。
The South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, focusing on likely domestic impacts, said that the situation in the Middle East presents a very urgent and uncertain scenario for his country and has since asked for measures to be prepared and implemented as needed. Now, across the border, North Korea strongly condemned the U.S. strikes against Iran, calling it a grave violation of a sovereign state's security interests and territorial rights. Pyongyang also laid blame on the U.S. and Israel for raising tensions in the Middle East. China has also urged for de-escalation, stressing the need to avoid any spillover into the region after its ambassador to the UN said that the strikes were a violation of the UN Charter and international laws. And for more, we are joined by CNA's Deborah Wong in Shenzhen. Debs, clearly there are concerns over Iran's possible closure of the Strait of Hormuz. How can that move, if it happens, potentially impact China?
So China is the world's largest oil importer, and over 70% of its supplies are from overseas, and half of that comes from the Middle East. And all that shipment from the Middle East, comes through the Strait of Hormuz, the main artery where 20% of global oil and gas shipments pass through. So it's not just China as well. When we look at Asia, Asia is heavily dependent on oil and gas shipments from the Middle East. We're talking about 80% of crude oil, 80% of LNG, as well as 60% of petroleum products flowing through this Strait of Hormuz. So any closure or restrictions could strangle supply. We could see a spike of commodity prices. And for China, we could also see it affect its ability to stabilize its growth or any of its recovery. Now, we've already seen the rise of Brent crude rising more than 5% in early Monday trading compared to last week. So credit agency Fitch Ratings say that OPEC Plus producers could in fact offer spare capacity to mitigate or cushion any impact of potential closures. But analysts are also saying that ongoing geopolitical problems, could make it challenging to rely very heavily on these alternatives. And we're talking about alternatives coming from Russia.
And what about concerns regarding China's economic interest in Iran? Could that be at risk, if the conflict drags on?
So just to give you a sense of the relationship between China and Iran, Western sanctions on Iran in recent years have accelerated cooperation between Iran and China, and the country is China's key partner in terms of energy and infrastructure investments, while China exports a large share of its electronics as well as machinery to Iran. So that's a sense of the scale. And in terms of statistics, we're talking about China's total investment in Iran in 2023 standing at over US $3.9 billion. Bilateral trade in 2024, it's quite massive. It's totaling over US $13.3 billion. And that's a trade surplus in China's favor. So there are definitely concerns that Chinese interests could be at risk. But at the same time, there are concerns. But at the same time, China has also diversified its economic interests across the Middle East in recent years. We're looking at its ties. It's strengthening its ties with Saudi Arabia. It's also deepened cooperation with the UAE. So analysts right now believe that the situation is still manageable. It can be contained. On the broader front, we do know that China is calling for de-escalation. It's hoping to play the peacemaker. But of course, observers are also saying that it could be a tall order. It's challenging on China's part, given that Israel is skeptical that China could be a viable mediator, given its criticisms of Israel over the Gaza conflict. Back to you.
It is a complicated situation, but thanks very much for that report. CNA's Deborah Wong, live from Shenzhen. Well, we are going to cross over to Trent Murray now. He is live in Tel Aviv. Trent, there's been a fresh round of attacks today. Give us the latest update on the situation where you are at.
Well, we saw that there was around 4 to 6 Iranian ballistic missiles fired across 4 different waves. Now, this was the longest period that we had seen, around 40 minutes. Those barrages, it took for them to take place, keeping millions of people in their shelters. We are being told that Israel's air defense system was largely able to intercept most of them, but we did see one impact on the ground at a power substation in the south of the country. There are reports that several towns there did lose electricity because of that. And electricity crews are on the way there now trying to restore power. But in response, the IDF has just said that it is now launching its own wave of airstrikes across Iran. I've just received a statement from Israel's defense minister saying that they are striking with unprecedented force regime targets and government repression bodies in the heart of Tehran. They list the Evin prison for political prisoners and regime opponents as being one of the targets, the destruction of Israel countdown clock in Palestine Square, internal security headquarters of the Revolutionary Guards, the ideology headquarters and other regime targets. So both sides continuing to trade fire and I think ignoring those calls for de-escalation. As we know, Iran is also, of course, promising to respond to the US's attacks on its nuclear facilities, saying that it is now free to retaliate against US bases and interests in the region.
Yeah, so Trent, Iran, they vowed major consequences in response to the weekend attacks on its nuclear sites. How else are the Israeli authorities responding or preparing for that?
Well, the state of emergency remains in place here, so people are not allowed to gather in large numbers in public. We know many businesses have been shuttered and schools are closed. That is because Israel is in a heightened state of alert over further Iranian retaliation. The challenge is, as we've discussed before, there is very little warning time when those missiles are fired. It only takes about 10 minutes for them to arrive, which is why the Israelis are exercising a lot of caution here. We also know that Israel's airspace continues to remain closed, as well as the airport, to regular flights. There are some flights coming back in now exclusively for Israelis to use as repatriation flights back home. For foreign governments trying to get their nationals out, including official messages from the likes of China, Thailand, Australia, they are continuing to call on people to use the land border crossings either into Jordan or into Egypt, and then to be able to fly out of the region from airports there in places like Oman and Sharm el-Sheikh.
All right, thanks so very much for that. And do stay safe. Trent Murray there live in Tel Aviv. And for the latest updates on the Israel-Iran conflict, you can head over to our website, cna.asia, or log on to our mobile app for commentaries such as this one on the choices Iran has in its response to U.S. strikes. Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party has been dealt a historic defeat in Sunday's Tokyo Metropolitan Assembly election. The LDP, led by Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, secured just 21 seats in the 127-member assembly. Well, that is less than their previous record low of 23 seats in 2017, deepening concerns about the stability of Mr. Ishiba's minority government. Well, the LDP's junior coalition partner, Komeito, ended the race with 19 seats. The big winner, Tomin First, a regional party that focused on public welfare and child-rearing policies. Well, it emerged with the most seats in what could signal a shift in voter priorities in the capital. Now, the Tokyo Assembly election is often seen as a bellwether for national sentiment just weeks ahead of July's crucial House of Councillors race. For more on this, we are joined by CNA's Michio Ishida live from Tokyo. Mitch, so walk us through about the results. How do you think that's of this Tokyo Assembly election? How is that going to impact Mr. Ishiba's ruling Liberal Democratic Party in the coming upper house election?
Well, hi, Elteli. Political watchers here were actually shocked the LDP lost so many seats in the Tokyo Assembly and replaced by Tomin First, a political party founded by Tokyo Governor Yuriko Koike in 2016. What some analysts think happened was voters who supported the LDP dispersed that ballot to other parties. They are Tomin First and two parties that won seats for the first time, National People's Party and Sansei-to. Now, you see, LDP has members with moderate conservative views and those regarded as right-wing. And analysts think electorates decided to vote for parties with a clear, united stance. Now, the relevance of Tokyo Assembly election is Japan's largest local election. 11.54 million were eligible voters, and the results in Tokyo could be seen as representing the national view. The Japanese capital attracts families, students, workers from all over the nation. Voter turnout was 47.59%. That's 5.2 points higher than in 2021. Now, in an exit poll by major daily Yomiuri and Nippon Television, rising prices and wages, medical and social welfare were issues of top concern. Such exit polls could provide hints on what candidates and political parties should address in the coming upper house election. Now, Tomin First is a party for the people of Tokyo, not a national party. So the upper house election will be an opportunity for parties to learn, perhaps from Tomin First's success this time.
What about public approval of the Ishiba cabinet based on the latest opinion polls? How's that looking?
Well, media polls the past few weeks suggested recovering approval rating for the Ishiba cabinet after a record low. Now, it's following the appointment of Shinjiro Koizumi to Agriculture Minister in May. Mr. Koizumi quickly acted to address the problem of expensive rice. The price of rice doubled compared to a year ago, and he called on retailers to procure and release the cheaper so-called reserved rice. And many consumers were happy to get a hold of cheaper rice. So on the back of Minister Koizumi's efforts, there were views the LDP might not do so badly in the assembly election, but the result was the worst ever for the LDP. And based on surveys conducted by media this past weekend, the Ishiba cabinet's approval rating is falling again. Now, Kyodo News highlighted the majority poll maintained a distrust towards the LDP for not banning political donations by companies and organizations in the Diet session, which ended on Sunday. Also last week, the LDP announced its upper house election pledge, and this included 20,000 yen, which is about $136 cash distribution to each resident, and an additional handout to children. Media polls, including TV Asahi's survey, suggested more than half polled were against it, seeing it as pork barrel distribution to gain votes in the upper house election. Now, for the proportional seating in the upper house election, 22% wish to vote for the LDP, 10.7% for the biggest opposition, Constitutional Democrats, but 35.8% were undecided. And anything can happen between today and the 20th of July when the upper house election is expected.
All right. Thanks so very much for that. CNA's Michio Ishida live from Tokyo. South Korea will be getting its first civilian defense minister in more than 60 years. President Lee Jae-myung has named a veteran lawmaker to take the job, making good on his election promise to appoint non-military personnel to lead the defense ministry. Now, An Gyu-bak is a former chair of the National Assembly's Defense Committee. Other key cabinet appointments: former UN ambassador Cho Hyun was named foreign minister, and Chung Dong-yung, a journalist turned lawmaker, will become unification minister, responsible for inter-Korean affairs. Now, the South Korean president also named ministers for agriculture, environment, labor, and maritime affairs. The nominations do not need a parliamentary approval, but will be reviewed in hearings that can be contentious at times. Time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, a look at the market reaction as investors brace for Iran's response to U.S. attacks on its nuclear sites. And China's revenue from selling land plunges to the lowest in a decade amid a prolonged property crisis. Hello again. We've got Roland Lim standing by with the very latest in business news. So, Roland, tell us all about the market reactions because of this fresh uncertainty and also the oil supply risks due to the Israel-Iran conflict.
Will do. I'll tell you, the reaction to the escalation in the conflict in the Middle East has been flighty. Fluctuations in the oil market, a sign of uncertainty about what's ahead. Market analysis speculate there wouldn't be a significant disruption to oil traffic from the Middle East, given Iran's muted immediate response to Washington's bombing of its nuclear sites. Oil prices gave up most of their early gains in intraday trade after advancing to a 5-month high. Analysts say oil is the primary focus as the risk of a supply shock has increased. The biggest disruption could be if Iran attempted to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. According to Iranian state media, the legislature has reached a consensus to close the key transit choke point, but the final decision rests on Iran's top security body and the supreme leader. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important trade routes for crude and handles around a quarter of the world's oil trade. The channel is shared between Iran in the north and Oman in the south, connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Some analysts say oil prices could shoot above $100 a barrel if the waterways close for a prolonged period. But turning that threat into reality won't be easy and could come at a steep cost to Iran itself. Iran has no legal authority to halt maritime traffic in the strait, and any attempt to do so would likely require the use or at least the threat of military force. That would almost certainly trigger a strong pushback from the U.S. Fifth Fleet and other Western navies patrolling the area. A direct confrontation would escalate tensions fast and put Iran at risk of serious military and economic fallout. Shutting down the Strait of Hormuz would also block Iran's own oil exports, delivering a blow to its economy. It would also risk alienating China, that's Tehran's biggest oil buyer and a key diplomatic backer to the United Nations. Earlier, I spoke with Claudia Galimberti, who is chief economist at Restart Energy. Now, he breaks down the impact of the global energy market in light of the Middle East crisis.
There is an enormous upward pressure right now, given what's going on in the Middle East. So what we have seen when Israel attacked Iran almost 2 weeks ago, there was a huge increase in prices, what we call the geopolitical risk premium. Just before the U.S. attacked Iran over the weekend, that geopolitical risk premium was about $10 per barrel. Today, there is an additional $2 per barrel on top of that. Therefore, we're talking about $78 per Brent, and the geopolitical risk premium about $12. Where can it go from here is anybody's guess, but there is this very important thing you mentioned in the introduction, which is the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of oil and LNG consumed in the world goes through the Strait of Hormuz. It is the most important choke point, and Iran, as you pointed out, at least the parliament said that that choke point needs to be squeezed and needs to be blocked so that the United States and other Western countries would suffer the consequence of what they've done. So if that happens, so if there is indeed, if something happens to the Strait of Hormuz and the flow of oil is stopped or is severely disrupted, then we can see prices going towards triple digit.
Equity markets in the region trading cautiously after the U.S. hit on Iran's nuclear facilities, heightening investor fears of an escalation in the Middle East conflict. Japan's Nikkei 225 fell. The accompanying jump in oil prices also weighed on the outlook for the country's economy and corporate earnings. Meantime, the Japanese yen, normally one of the most sought-after safe havens in times of geopolitical stress, has dropped 2.4% against the dollar in intraday trade. Japan imports almost all of its oil, and a spike in crude since threatens to worsen the country's trade balance, diminishing the yen's appeal. South Korean shares also ending lower. But the mainland markets did manage to reverse losses to close in the green. The stocks were lifted by the strongest southbound inflows via the Stock Connect in 3 weeks. Shanghai Composite ending the day up 0.65%. The second Bourse Shenzhen component up 0.43%, and the benchmark Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong 2/3% in the green. Meantime, the Chinese yuan did slip onto a 3-week low against the dollar as investors rush to perceived safe haven assets. Japan's manufacturing sector finally nudged back into growth this month, breaking a nearly year-long contraction. But demand remains uncertain as concerns over U.S. tariffs and the global economy continues to weigh on sentiment. The latest flash PMI shows that manufacturing rose to 50.4 in June, marking the end of an 11-month contraction streak. Factory output and stockpiling of purchases drove the recovery. Still, new orders, especially from overseas, kept sliding, showing that demand is far from stable. Meanwhile, Japan's services sector is gaining steam. The services PMI climbed to 51.5, powered by new business growth. That momentum helped offset weaker demand from export clients and gave the broader economy a much-needed boost. Together, manufacturing and services pushed the composite PMI to 51.4, and that's the highest level since February. The rise reflects a private sector starting to regain balance, even as inflation pressures ease and hiring picks up across the board. China's revenue from selling land plunged to the lowest in a decade, a sign of persisting weakness in the property market, which is also hurting government income. Land sales revenue slumped 14.6% on year to $27 billion last month. And that's the lowest since 2015, according to Bloomberg calculations using Ministry of Finance data. This comes as authorities spend more money to boost growth. The sharp drop in land sales highlights the ongoing struggles in its property sector, a key drag on the broader economy that's already under pressure from U.S. tariffs. The revenue shortfall is squeezing local governments, leaving them with less room to stimulate spending and to drive growth. Economists anticipate land sales to slide even further, though fiscal stimulus in the second half could help steady the recovery. And that'll do it for business. Oteli.
Thanks very much for that, Roland. Well, we are going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, the NATO Summit is due to take place this week in the Netherlands. But the gathering might not have the clout that it wants. We take a look at who's attending and who's not. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we are following. Israel and Iran trading fire for the 11th day as international calls for de-escalation grow. China says the strikes violate the UN Charter and international law. The Tokyo election deals a blow to Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Voters have knocked Japan's ruling party from its position as the largest group in the city assembly. And South Korean President Lee Jae-myung picks a civilian as defense minister and its United Nations representative Cho Hyun as foreign minister. The annual NATO Summit is set to begin Tuesday at The Hague amid global tensions. Secretary General Mark Rutte is expected to address a media conference in about 3 hours. And key issues to watch here: NATO countries pledging to ramp up defense spending to 5% of GDP, as demanded by U.S. leader Donald Trump. Spain has said it is not going to comply. Also on the agenda, support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. Well, Mr. Trump, according to Nikkei Asia, wants to meet with the security bloc's Indo-Pacific partners, Japan, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand, to expand security cooperation in the face of perceived threats from China and Russia. But the meeting might not take place. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba is skipping the event. Our local broadcaster Fuji Television says the Indo-Pacific partners meeting with Mr. Trump likely won't happen, and that a meeting between the two leaders as well not likely. Tokyo says Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya will attend the summit instead. Well, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung is also giving the event a miss to deal with domestic priorities and growing uncertainties in the Middle East. Seoul is expected to send a senior official in Mr. Lee's place. Well, New Zealand's Christopher Luxon is attending the summit, while Australia will be represented by Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles, who is also the country's defence minister. Well, the upcoming summit could potentially be one of the most uncertain in the history of the alliance. CNA's Genevieve Wu finds out how tension between Washington and its European allies could impact the relevance or even the survival of NATO.
The attitude of U.S. President Donald Trump towards the Russia-Ukraine war has been sharply at odds with America's allies in Europe. This family photo of leading European nations and Canada rallying behind Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is what NATO looks like without the U.S. America's relationship with the EU was further strained when Mr. Trump and his team gave Mr. Zelensky a dressing down at the White House. Is the world's largest peacetime military alliance at risk? Before we consider the possibility and consequences of NATO without the U.S., let's take a step back and ask, what is NATO and what is the U.S. role in NATO? The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, is a military alliance comprising the U.S., Canada, and European nations. It was formed in Washington, D.C. in April 1949. With the U.S. and Canada as the chief architects and 12 founding member countries in Europe, including Belgium, Denmark, France, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, and the UK. Over the past 76 years, NATO has expanded. Today, the alliance has 32 members, and its headquarters is in Brussels, chosen for its strategic central location in Europe. Why was NATO formed in 1949? It is a defensive nuclear alliance under the leadership of the U.S. in post-war Europe.
And the Soviet Union emerged as a very powerful country at the end of the Cold War. The United States believed that the best way to deal with a strong resurgent Soviet Union was to try and get as many European allies as possible.
As the first Secretary General of the alliance, Lord Izmi put it, NATO's role is to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. Its inception has to be understood against the background of the post-war situation in Europe, where you had an increasing sense that the Soviet Union was intent on expanding to the West and subjugating more and more countries to its imperialist dominance.
What is the NATO doctrine? There are 14 articles in the NATO treaty. Article 5 sums up the core of the alliance, that an attack against one ally is an attack against all. It is a promise of collective defense.
Article 5 is what keeps Europe secure. The United States continues to play a central role in the alliance, thanks to the size of its military, thanks to the size of its nuclear deterrent, thanks to its intelligence and logistics, etc., etc. But it's also a vehicle that enables the United States to project power internationally in Europe and beyond.
The U.S. provides troops, ammunition, and military bases across continental Europe. America's nuclear weapons are seen as extending deterrence to all NATO members.
Well, it is obviously the nuclear umbrella, whereas France and the UK have their own nuclear deterrence. They don't quite have the same capabilities and the same kind of full escalation ladder that the US brings to the table, which is arguably necessary to provide a backstop in the case of a conflict with a country such as Russia or China.
The first Supreme Allied Commander for Europe was General Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1951, who later became the 34th U.S. president. This position has always been held by an American since Eisenhower. The current Supreme Allied Commander is General Christopher G. Carvioli of the U.S. Army. What are some of America's largest contributions to NATO?
You give Europe a tremendous sense of security that they have the mighty United States backing them against this very strong and powerful Soviet Union. And of course, the United States was carrying out a strategy that the United States should go for the containment of the Soviet Union. And that containment policy was remarkably successful because at the end of the Cold War, it basically led to the collapse of the Soviet Union.
If the U.S. does pull out of NATO, who might be the biggest winners and losers in such a scenario?
It is important to remember that a demise of NATO or its turn into something irrelevant would really come to bite the United States as well. I mean, the United States has military bases in Europe, has operated airports, logistical centers, and those serve not only in maintaining a favorable balance of power in Europe, but they also help the United States to project power in the Middle East, in the Red Sea, even arguably in the Indo-Pacific.
I think without a NATO, clearly the biggest winner will be Russia, because Russia will be much, much stronger individually than any of the European countries. If President Donald Trump pulls the United States out of NATO, there'll be no NATO left.
Professor, you have recently recommended that Europe should exit NATO. Why did you propose that idea?
If he spends more than 5% of his GNP on defense, Europe doesn't need NATO. It'll be powerful enough. You know, Donald Trump keeps on threatening Europe, and the Europeans are so scared that they dare not reply robustly. All they have to do is stand up and tell President Donald Trump, thank you very much for your strong support over the years. Now we will take care of ourselves. We will leave NATO. And if they were to say that, the Americans will come rushing back to say, hey, no, please don't leave. Please don't leave. It's like playing a game of poker. Sometimes you have to bluff.
If you were a betting man, Prof, do you think the U.S. will pull out of NATO?
Well, I think one has to make a distinction between a formal decision to leave NATO, which I don't think he will do, because it requires, to some extent, congressional approval. But there can also be an informal decision to give NATO much less priority and much less importance. And the second can be just as damaging to the Europeans.
I don't think the United States will pull out of NATO in the second Trump term or in the foreseeable future at large, but I think we are running a real risk of a US disengagement from Europe. I think we are in for a fraught couple of years, really, and I think it will be important for Europeans to step up to this challenge and act, truly responsibly and take their own security seriously.
The expert consensus seems to be that Donald Trump will not pull the U.S. out of NATO at this point. However, his message that America has been shouldering the world's security burdens is loud and clear. He wants European allies to cough up more for defense spending. And perhaps this message has landed. The UK, Germany, Poland and Denmark have announced higher military budgets, while the EU has presented a plan to increase defense spending by 800 billion euros to shore up support for Ukraine. And that might just stave off the mercurial US president's musings on a NATO without America for now.
The World Economic Forum's second largest annual gathering begins tomorrow. And this year, there is increased interest from the Middle East and North Africa, otherwise known as the Summer Davos. And this year's edition takes place in the Chinese city of Tianjin. Olivia Xiong has more.
Located about 100 kilometers away from China's capital Beijing, the northern city of Tianjin is all set to play host to the Summer Davos. A post-pandemic record of more than 1,700 participants from 90 countries are expected this year, including those from the government, businesses, and civil society.
We continue to see strong representation from the US and Europe, as well as Asia Pacific. And this year, we are also seeing a lot more interest from the Middle East.
About 120 participants hail from the Middle East and North Africa this year, double the number from just a year ago. With the Israel-Iran conflict posing risk to trade routes, energy supplies, and large infrastructure investment, China's strategic posture across security and economic engagement in the region are likely to linger in the background of participants' minds.
The global geopolitical situation right now is becoming more and more uncertain. So China is seen as a relatively neutral and stable partner that does not interfere in the regional domestic politics. China's reluctance to take on a hard security role could limit how far it will be seen as an alternative, reliable partner or power of the influence of the region. Nevertheless, even if the Middle Eastern countries recognize or see China's lack of solid influence on the conflicts, I think they will continue to enhance their economic engagement with China.
Seated on the coast of the Bohai Sea, Tianjin is home to the busiest port in northern China. It will be the 8th time that the city is hosting the Summer Davos gathering, alternating with the northeastern city of Dalian, another port city.
The theme for this year is Entrepreneurship for a New Era, and over the course of 3 days, participants are set to gather here in Tianjin and discuss a range of topics, from new energy and materials to the global economy and China's economic outlook. That being closely watched, as economists say, the country looks on track to hit its GDP growth target of around 5% for this year.
This has come amid a slew of stimulus measures, as well as a charm offensive to woo foreign investment to tackle pressures at home and abroad. Chinese officials hoping that the gathering will showcase the opportunities available to global firms.
世界开放的指数在不断的下滑，这个单边主义、保护主义加剧，而多边主义、自由贸易受到了严峻的挑战。 在这样的一个背景下，我们觉得年会的召开本身就是对经济全球化的一个更好的支持和呼应。
The Summer Davos is one of several major international events on China's calendar. In the second half of the year, the country is also set to host the World Artificial Intelligence Conference and the Shanghai Cooperation Forum Leaders Summit. Olivia Xiong, CNA, Tianjin, China.
Meantime, Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong says that the relationship between Singapore and China will continue to develop and grow with new ways of cooperation. And these include areas like digital and green economies. He made the observation during an official visit to Beijing, where he met Chinese Premier Li Qiang. Mr. Wong was greeted with a welcome ceremony at the Great Hall of the People and inspected the Guard Parade before a delegation meeting with Premier Li Qiang. Mr. Wong says that the visit comes soon after Singapore's general election with a new term of government. He hopes that both sides continue to build and strengthen ties.
The relationship between China and Singapore has continued to deepen and grow because it's a partnership built on a deep level of mutual respect, trust, and understanding. This deep level of trust and understanding cannot be taken for granted. It has to be cultivated, nurtured, year after year, generation after generation. And that's why I'm fully committed, together with the rest of my team, to strengthen our interactions and exchanges with our counterparts in China.
你这次访问一定会为两国关系发展注入新的动力。你也知道，当前国际形势是变乱交织，特别是不确定、不稳定的因素还是在增多。在这样的背景下，我个人觉得，中心作为友好近邻和重要的伙伴，加强合作和交流尤为关键。
Earlier, Mr. Wong met with several Chinese business officials. He said there were good discussions and he welcomed the use of Singapore as a base to grow their presence in the region and beyond. He also visited Beijing's Humanoid Robot Innovation Center. He says China has made great strides in emerging technologies like AI and learned how it can be applied to real-world situations. Coming up on East Asia tonight, people of Japan's Okinawa mark 80 years since the end of a major battle on the island. And the atomic bomb dome in Hiroshima recommended to be listed as a special historic site. A ceremony has been held at the Peace Memorial Park to the south of Okinawa Prefecture in Japan, marking 80 years since the end of the Battle of Okinawa. And one of the most consequential land-based conflicts during the Second World War, the Battle of Okinawa, resulted in more than 240,000 deaths. Well, the dire number was 1 in 4 of the prefecture's residents at the time. Today, hundreds gathered at the site of the final fighting in Itoman City to pay their respects. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba says it is important to reflect on Okinawa's painful past and called for renewed efforts to ensure peace and prosperity in the prefecture. The atomic bomb dome, a hollowed-out structure in the middle of Japan's Hiroshima city, will soon be listed as a special historic site. Well, the Western-styled brick building with its iconic metal structure is a poignant reminder of the 1945 U.S. atomic bombing of the city. Officials made the recommendation last week in a bid to ensure the structure's long-term preservation. The move was prompted by a report earlier this year on efforts to keep the structure upright over the past decades. The document noted that the structure also serves as a symbol of the first use of atomic weapons. The UNESCO World Heritage Site used to be the Hiroshima Prefectural Commercial Exhibition Hall when it was completed back in 1950. Now, the first half of the year has not started off so well for the tourism industry in Thailand. It lost its crown as the most visited country in ASEAN, and arrivals from what used to be its biggest visitor market has also been falling. Well, our AP correspondent Jeremy Koh with all the details from Bangkok.
Lights, camera, action. Except that there's a lot less action than there was just a few months ago. Bandatung Road is just a short walk from Bangkok's prestigious Chulalongkorn University, and this area has undergone quite a remarkable transformation over the years. In the past, this was just a quiet neighborhood of shop houses, but over time, it became a lot more vibrant at night. And just last year, this was dubbed the world's 14th coolest street by global lifestyle brand Time Out. Chanachai Nimipongsat has been running this restaurant in Bandatong for 3 years. He says that weaker numbers are expected when Thailand enters the rainy season starting around May. But this year, it's been more than a seasonal lull.
ปีที่แล้วคนเดินประมาณ10,000 คนถึง 30,000 คนหายไปประมาณ 80% ฮะมี 20% ก็ยังมีเดินอยู่นะครับคนไทยก็หายไปประมาณ 50% ครับ
Only 1.95 million Chinese tourists traveled to Thailand in the first 5 months of this year, almost one-third less than last year's 2.9 million. Part of this, analysts are attributing to the highly publicized abduction of a Chinese actor by scam syndicates when he landed in Thailand. Though he was later rescued, many have been questioning if it's safe to visit Thailand, if criminal gangs can simply kidnap tourists and take them across the border to Myanmar like they did with Wang Xing.
之前出的一些新闻嘛，还是比较有一些担忧的。对于安全方面，尤其是 中国这边电诈这个方面的。
其实挺担忧的，我们本来有个男孩子一起来的，后面他没有一起来了，所以就是我们2个女孩子。但我们想着可以早点回去嘛，就比较安全。
我稍微担心一点，为什么？因为之前不是那王兴那出过事儿嘛。
The slowing Chinese market has affected areas beyond Ban That Tong, including the city's traditional Chinatown.
เปิดมาตั้งแต่ปี 2540 ก็ 28 ปีแล้ว ก็ปีนี้แย่ที่สุดนะ ตั้งแต่ที่เคยเป็นมาเลยใช่สมมติว่าได้วันละ 700-1,000 1,000 เงี้ย ปีนี้ก็เหลือวันละ 300 เงี้ย 400 เงี้ย แต่มันต่างกันอย่างขนาดนั้นเลยครับ เกิน 50%.
Some businesses here say they've had to adapt to the new reality. Like this shop, which used to focus on selling costly shark's fin and bird's nest, traditionally considered delicacies for the Chinese.
We have to change the main customer. Like before, we are doing like the tourist main, but now we have to do like the B2B. Yeah, like to find like the customer that live in Thailand, like long stay Chinese people, or run the business in Thai, right? Restaurant, Chinese restaurants, we have to find like a new customer, like B2B, yes.
Dr. Pipat Nungnarimithai is the Managing Director and Chief Economist of the Kinakin Part Financial Group. He says Thailand will need to diversify its economy, which was badly hit by global COVID-19 lockdowns.
This is probably the key headwind to the Thai economy in general, because if you look at the data over the past 2 years, the contribution from tourism growth, which is recovering from a low base, has been contributing for more than 100% of the Thailand GDP, right? And we probably see no growth for foreign tourism this year, which means that the strong engine of growth is being shut down.
But Thailand might find it hard to wean itself off tourism. After all, the data so far, as well as further projections, all point to the industry rebounding from the pandemic. The Thai government has been looking at building resorts that combine casinos and entertainment complexes. The cabinet has approved a draft law in March, but debate over the issue continues. And Dr. Pipat is reserving judgment on whether Las Vegas-style casino resorts will better position Thailand's tourism industry for the long haul.
Even if it's approved today, it's not going to be operational in 5-6 years, right? So in the meantime, those challenges remain, right?
But solutions cannot come fast enough for these vendors, some of whom had relocated from their previous locations to tap on the Chinese market. Already, Malaysia is threatening Thailand's position as the most visited country in ASEAN after it allowed visitors from China to enter for a short term without a visa. According to official statistics, more tourists went to Malaysia, including those on short excursions, than to Thailand in the first 4 months of this year. With competition for the Chinese yuan picking up in the region, the crowds and the hopes these local vendors are pinning on the Chinese tourists are fading fast. Jeremy Cole, Bangkok.
That wraps up East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can look us up on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.